Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to introduce Emil Nusbaum. He is our Director of Government Affairs with ARA, and we today are going to be discussing the most recent PPP changes to the loan forgiveness. So, Emil, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. So as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, especially if you've already borrowed or taken a PPP loan, on June 5th, President Trump signed HR 7010, which is the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act. And the purpose of this bill was, after the CARES Act was passed originally, that there's a lack of clarity surrounding a lot of issues relating to the PPP program. And so the House Democrats originally had passed this Flexibility Act in order to provide borrowers and small businesses and businesses generally that have received PPP loans to have better chances at receiving full forgiveness for their loans, which is of critical importance, obviously, because otherwise, if you have part of your loan that's not forgiven, then you are going to have a loan as opposed to it more or less a grant that you don't have to pay back to the bank.
Right. And we. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah. So we've done one of these before, and we've had some other guests on. And I remember Scott Robertson was on with us last time we did this, and his perspective was that even if part of it, like, he entered into it thinking even if part of it isn't forgiven, that is practically free money, and he was perfectly fine with that. Now, as I'm sure several business owners feel the same way, we still wanted to try to provide current, updated information on the loan forgiveness. And I've got some questions I'm going to fire at you, and then we're gonna while for anybody watching, just fire away your questions, and we'll fold them in as we're having this conversation. So, is there anything else you want to add before we jump into it, Emil?
Yeah. So the bill was basically passed unanimously, with the exception of one member of Congress who voted against it, and that the new law basically changes some of the criteria for reaching full forgiveness. And there's about 5 main changes to the PPP program that we're going to cover. It's more time to use PPP funds. It lowers the threshold for loan forgiveness. It also provides a longer payback period for money that turns out not to be forgiven. It gives you a little more time to rehire workers, and it also allows for payroll tax deferments. However, I really want to state that the information that I'm going to provide is more of a general nature and shouldn't be taken as specific guidance, because every business has its own set of circumstances. And if you've already received a PPP loan, you need to consult with your own accountant who knows your specific circumstances, and consult with them, because you really do want to have this loan forgiven, even though the loan terms, if you have some money that's not forgiven, it's very low. But still, you should consult with your own accountant before taking any action, especially now and currently, because the guidance is changing every day.
Right. And I want to kind of echo what you said and remind our viewers. Emil is offering information from a legislative perspective. He's studied the bill. He studied the evolution of it and the different versions, and so he's going to speak to what the bill says. And but like he pointed out, for specific advice on how that applies within your business, within your accounting, that would be, you can use some of the information that he shares to go to your accountant and say, hey, what do you know about this? And so we just want to be clear about that. So I guess without further delay, I'm going to fire my first question at you, buddy. So originally it was 75%. Now it seems to have changed. So can someone use more than 25% of their funds for other than payroll, or how has that scale moved? What is the percentage that needs to be allocated for payroll versus other expenses?
Yeah, so the new bill, it actually lowers the threshold for loan forgiveness, and it gives businesses greater flexibility in how they want to use those funds while also still remaining eligible for forgiveness. So, for instance, as Vince, you mentioned that the law used to require that 75% of your PPP funds be used for payroll, 25% on qualified non-payroll expenses such as utilities or mortgage interest. This new bill has allowed you to now you do the calculation at 60% for payroll and then 40% for the same non-payroll and qualified expenses. So for payroll, obviously that includes wages, salaries, commissions, tips. It also includes hazard pay, bonuses, and employer contributions to healthcare, as well as retirement funds. And it is important to note that the SBA provided guidance that for the maximum an individual employee can receive is $15,385, or essentially the equivalent of $100,000 annual salary. And now with the extended 24-week period, that's been increased to $46,154. And if you are a self-employed Schedule C filer, then that number is $20,833. However, for non-payroll expenses, for rent, utilities, mortgage interest on real or personal property, those expenses, remember that those expenses, they needed to be incurred before February 15th. So if you went and rented a new space after that, you can't use that. That's not a qualified non-payroll expense. However, if you do want to pay more than 60% on payroll, you can certainly do so and still be eligible for forgiveness. That's just kind of the 60% is the low bar, and anything if you spent 55% on payroll, then you wouldn't be eligible for forgiveness on that 5%.
Gotcha. What if you incurred? So let's take utility payments for example, and you have to pay a bill that was incurred before, but the bill is due during the period, and then you're also incurring a utility expense during. Can you use PPP funds for both, even though the bill for the expenses that you're incurring is not going to come until after?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So you actually can. So if I had a bill that if I received during the covered period I had, I'd be able to use my PPP loans for paying that bill that I got, say, for May, and my covered period was in June, but I received the bill in May. You'd be able to use it. So if the bill was due within the covered period, you can use PPP funds. And then also, just to clarify, and if you have a bill that you are starting to incur during the covered period, you can even pay that bill afterwards with PPP funds. I hope that was clear.
Okay.
It's a little sticky.
No, that's okay. And look, anybody watching, if you want clarification, if you have a question on one of these topics, please chime in, and we'll try our best to address your question. So if somebody receives a PPP loan prior to June 5th, 2020, when the Flexibility Act was passed, do they need to stay within their 8-week cover period?
No. So if you received your PPP loan prior to June 5th, then you actually can opt to take the 24-week period. So that's up to you. However, it's important to note that right now, while it's assumed that if say I have my PPP funds, I was anticipating 8 weeks, but I have enough to go for 12 weeks. It is assumed that at the end of that 12-week period, you can basically use that as a stopping point. But at the same time, there's not enough guidance right now to essentially say that if you opt for the 24-week period, then you have to use the whole 24-week period. So we're waiting to see whether or not if you choose the 24-week period, then if you have to basically have the same staffing requirements throughout the entirety of the 24-week period. But we're waiting for more guidance to see whether or not that is the case. Or if, say, I run out of funds by 12 weeks, then I can basically stop at the 12 weeks and still be eligible for full forgiveness.
I'm gonna put a question up here that we were asked prior to the show. So from Donna. She's asking if what if she their time is up on June 14th. How do they abide by the original rules or new rules?
So you could abide by the new rules if you want to extend from that prior 8-week period rules to the 24-week. However, the one rule that you do need to be aware of is that the maturity of the loan, if you plan to use the original 2-year maturity period for repaying any non-forgivable part of the loan, then you can keep that the same. But if you want to use the new 5-year rule, you would have to consult with your bank and come to a mutual agreement that you would want documented, basically establishing that you want to have that 5-year period where the loan matures.
Okay.
And it would still be at that 1%. It would still be at the 1% interest rate.
Gotcha. So M&K Used Parts wants to know, what if they already used their 75% of their money for payroll?
So if you already, sorry.
You go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you. So if you already used your 75% of your money on payroll, you'd be well within the guidelines for full forgiveness, so long as the additional 25% you received is used on the qualifying non-payroll expenses.
Okay. Now, how will the forgiveness be impacted if they elect to extend their PPP covered period from 8 weeks to 24? How does their forgiveness impacted? How is the forgiveness impacted?
So how will the forgiveness period be impacted? So, for instance, you'd be able to, it seems like you'd be able to pay, if you have that maximum threshold, you could do $46,154 for any one employee, but we're still waiting for more clarification and actual specific guidance, because as of now, we haven't received much in the way of official guidance. It's been kind of a recommendation on what the guidance is going to come out with, what the SBA and the Treasury are going to come out with in the next few weeks. But also, you need to be careful, and you should definitely consult with your accountant, because even though it seems like, I mentioned this before, even though it seems like you can extend for the 24-week period, and if you run out of funds within 12 weeks, then you can submit for forgiveness and, then change your staffing requirements because you just don't have the capital to do so afterwards for weeks, for the next 12 weeks within the 24-week period. We really need clarification. We need to be sure that, are we locked into that 24-week period if we opt to choose that 24-week period? Or is it more fluid in that if I needed to end, if I had a PPP loan and I needed to end and I ran out of funds at 12 or 13 weeks, is that my end point? And would I be eligible for full forgiveness at that end point? And then can I make staffing changes as needed afterwards? Because you need to stay at that. If you need to stay, you can't cut employee salaries by more than 25%.
Gotcha. Can a business apply for both EIDL Advance, and PPP?
Yes, you can. You can apply for a PPP loan, the EIDL Advance, which is the up to $10,000, $1,000 per employee that doesn't have to be repaid to the lender or the government. And then you can also apply for a regular EIDL loan. So, however, your PPP forgiveness will be subtracted by however much you've received in your EIDL Advance. So if you received the maximum $10,000 for your EIDL Advance, then you would want to, you'd have that subtracted from your forgiveness for your PPP. Additionally, the EIDL, you wouldn't want to use that to pay for payroll, obviously, because the PPP is really designed to keep your employees employed, and you probably wouldn't want to commingle that just for an accounting purposes. And then you also want to make sure you get the forgiveness on the PPP. And it's important to note the EIDL and the EIDL Advance, they have reopened, so you can apply for those right now. And additionally, the PPP, it's important to note that last I checked, there's $130 billion in funds still available. And the last day you can apply for the PPP is June 30th. So if you haven't already, I would strongly suggest you apply. And it's preferable if you do so at a regional or small bank, because your chances of actually getting that loan will be much greater.
Okay. So we've talked about extending the period from 8 to 24 weeks, 75% slid to 60% for payroll, increase of loan maturity. Did we touch on that?
Yeah, we touched on it briefly, but I'll kind of give a rundown. So the loan maturity under the prior terms before the PPP Flexibility Act, it was a 2-year maturity and at 1% interest. However, now we've modified it to anyone that has been approved for a PPP after June 5th, they will receive a 5-year maturity date at the same 1% interest. And this is only for money that turns out not to be forgiven. However, if you received your PPP before June 5th, you're still subject to the 2-year maturity date on non-forgivable portions of the loan. But as long as you consult with your lender and you both agree on changing it to the 5-year period, you can do so. And if you do decide to take that route, there's currently no specific guidance on how to actually approach doing that. But you would want to contact your bank, and no matter what, you would want any sort of documentation showing that the bank has actually agreed to take on the 5-year maturity date.
Gotcha. Do you think there's any advantage to submitting after 8 weeks instead of spreading it out? Or do you think that's more of an accounting question, or are you comfortable with this?
I think that would be more of an accounting question, because it would obviously depend on your specific circumstances as a business owner. And say you've pretty much exhausted your PPP funds at the 8-week point with very little left over. Just because we don't know if you happen to opt for the 24-week period, if you have to then, use that whole 24-week period, you'd want to be careful of that. But I would strongly suggest you discuss with your accountant on what the best course of action is for your specific business.
Okay, thanks. Talk to me about the time period in which you have to rehire.
So for the time period you have to rehire, previously the deadline was June 30th, but now under 2 new safe harbor provisions and under the guidance, the law gives you until December 31st to rehire full-time equivalent employees, and it gives you in order for their salaries to count towards forgiveness. And then additionally, they provided 2 provisions, and I don't want to misspeak here, but those are the 2 exceptions were if you had an inability to rehire a worker or similarly qualified employee before December 31st, or if you had an inability to return to the same level of business activity that you had in February, then you can wait until December 30th. And that's basically if you were required to kind of lower your business level activity due to some sort of COVID-19 related precautions, such as, a governor's stay-at-home order or restrictions. Especially, this is going to be especially applicable to the restaurant industry, not necessarily, I don't think, auto recycling. That if you only could operate at 25% capacity.
Gotcha. But if business fell off and it didn't come back, this helps. Doesn't bind you to rehiring everybody, right?
Correct. The first one, the inability to rehire a worker or similarly qualified employee by December 31st, that will definitely help you in terms of achieving forgiveness.
Okay. And then we talked about the extended deferral period for both paying back and the loan, and the final application date, right?
Yeah, so the final application date, I think originally was June 6th. However, now it is, I believe, it is December 31st. And the SBA yesterday released two new loan forgiveness applications that you can use. One of the applications was an easy application, which is designed to, assist businesses in actually submitting the form. And there's 3 conditions that would allow you to use the easy form, the easy application. And one is if you are self-employed or have no employees. Don't think that will be very relevant to many of you. The other 2 that you could use to use the easy application is if you did not reduce the salaries or wages of your employees by more than 25% and did not reduce the number of hours of your employees. Additionally, if you could also use the easy application if you experienced reductions in business activity as a result of health directives related to COVID-19 and did not reduce the salaries or wages of your employees by more than 25%. So those are the three conditions that would allow you to use the easy application. And there's also an updated full application for forgiveness as well.
Okay.
And you would want
All
to
right.
talk to your accountant before submitting your application.
Okay. We do have a question. If you, and the question from Julie is, does the 60/40 rule change automatically if you got your PPP loan before June 5th?
So from my understanding, it is yes. However, before doing anything and, before changing your calculations, once again, please consult your accountant because the rules are changing rapidly. They're changing all the time. But it would seem the way the legislation and the way the limited guidance that's been provided right now that yes, as long as you kept that 60/40, then you would be eligible for forgiveness.
Yeah. So again, yeah, and I appreciate that, Emil. Again, I want to remind everybody watching that Emil's been studying the bills and the revisions, and his wheelhouse is going to be to speak to what they say, what the language is, and all that. And so you can use this information and go back to your accountant and say, hey, this is what I heard, and this is what the bill says, and then they should give you good counsel as to how to apply that in your business. So I appreciate the questions. If you have any more questions, please fire away. I think we're gonna wrap this up. But before we do, I'm gonna ask Emil two things. One, is there anything else about this that is new or just super important that should be gone over again that maybe we went over the first time? And then the second question is, I was gonna give you an opportunity to speak quickly about any new. You've been putting out weekly updates. And I just thought I'd give you a platform for a minute or two to talk about anything new and exciting that you see that has come down the pike recently, or that you see on the future.
Thank you, Vince. So just one final point on the new updated legislation for the PPP is that it will allow for payroll tax deferment through the end of 2020 if you have your entire loan forgiven. So that's important to note. And then secondly, just kind of an update, we've been putting out the recycler update twice a week, and I'm trying to, keep members informed of, any updates with the PPP, any other relief programs. In fact, I will provide links on today. I will provide links to the new easy application for forgiveness, as well as the new application for forgiveness generally. And just in general, I'll keep members updated and just keep following what's going on. It's July now, so Congress is considering, finally, doing business liability protections, and that's going to come up pretty soon because Senator McConnell, he had explained that the Senate will take up, the next COVID relief bill. There's been a lot of debate around what's going to be included. The House had proposed $3 trillion in theirs. The Senate said it was a non-starter. President Trump wants $2 trillion in relief. And it seems like there will be some sort of targeted business relief in terms of further spending programs. So I guess we'll wait and see what that's going to include. But hopefully it will provide beneficial to the community.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that addresses about employees who choose to self-quarantine and how long they choose to stay off of work? This is actually a question from Fran Reitman. She's watching on my personal watch party, so it's not showing up on the ARA feed. But she did ask that question. I thought I can't put it up there but I wanted to pose it to you to see if you had any insight on this.
I don't really have any insight on that, unfortunately. It's obviously an important issue to know whether, if you have an employee that's out due to COVID-19. It's probably going to depend on what state you're in, depending on what legislation's been passed, knowing that, several states are working on passing their own legislation relating to, worker safety, as well as there's currently, most of the federal laws and regulations that have been passed, it's merely guidance.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have enough to necessarily speak very informatively on that.
But well, what that means is, right? Yeah, but right now, what that means, if I'm not mistaken, is there's nothing formally out there to address this, right? Or you would know about it.
Obviously, not that I know about, but I know that some states have been actively, and have passed legislation that would, kind of dictate the terms of that and what businesses are expected to do. But from the federal side, it's been, from the CDC and Health and Human Services, it's been, and OSHA, it's been mostly voluntary guidance. But obviously that guidance will potentially help in the cases of if happens to be a lawsuit. You would want to be shown to going above and beyond and protecting your workers, but at the same time, that would be more of a question for your attorney in your specific set of circumstances. But I think that's the best I can answer right now.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anything else you want to touch on that you're seeing develop?
Nope.
Okay.
Yep. I could mention from the workers' compensation. If you've been following the recycler updates, I've mentioned worker compensation laws in the states. California, for instance, had passed an executive order basically requiring that if someone had contracted COVID-19 and had been at work and had been any essential worker, then there would be a presumption that they had caught COVID-19 at your place of work, which is obviously problematic for the business community. However, in many other states, that legislation trying to pass a similar law is there's been little action on it, and that's probably partly due to the business community's concern, as well as Congress seems poised to address business liability nationally when they start thinking about the next COVID relief bill. Okay, very good. All right, well, Emil, I want to thank you for your time. Everybody that is watching, I want to thank you for tuning in. Please reach out to us, whether it's the comments. You can private message us. You can email me at vince@a-r-a.org. I want to hear how we're doing, and I want to hear if there's a topic that you want us to touch on. Please reach out. And but other than that, we want to thank you guys for watching and tuning in, and we look forward to the next time. We're going to be having 3 more Jason Redmond interviews. We hope you really enjoyed those. I know we got a lot of great feedback on it. And he's very exciting and very insightful to help people move away from the troubled ambushes they're having personally and professionally. So anyway, thanks again for all of that. Please give us some feedback. Like this, share it. You can subscribe on our YouTube channel. We appreciate all the attention and the engagement that you guys give us. So thank you very much. Thank you, Emil. And we hope everybody has a great day and stay safe. Thank you, Vince. Everyone take care. All right, bye-bye.